Hello, this is Justin Williams with the Wolfpacker Podcast. I'm joined today, as always, by co-host Matt Carter, and we're also joined by a special guest from the ACC Network. We've got college football analyst Eric Mac Lain on joining us to talk Wolfpack and ACC football. Before we get too far into this podcast episode, this episode is brought to you in part by JFQ Lending. With interest rates below 3%, there has never been a better time to lock in a low fixed interest rate on your mortgage. You'll never need to think about refinancing again. Set it and forget it. And with JFQ Lending, you are guaranteed to get the highest level of customer service. They have an A-plus rating with the Better Business Bureau and over 3,000 five-star reviews. Give Hunter Clausen a call today at 480-513-3992 or email Hunter directly at hclausen@jfqlending.com. That's HCLAUSSEN@jfqlending.com. JFQ Lending Inc., Equal Access Lender, licensed in over 40 states, www.jfqlending.com. And while you're at it, head over to thewolfpacker.com and use promo code PACK60. That's promo code PACK60 for a free 60-day trial on all of our premium content, news, and analysis. While you're listening to us, please be sure to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast wherever you listen to us. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, pretty much everywhere you listen to podcasts. And of course, if you're watching us on our YouTube channel, swipe up if you're watching on mobile and give us a subscribe to our YouTube channel. And so today, I'm going to pass off the introduction of our guest to Matt Carter, but our guest is Eric Mac Lain with the ACC Network. You can give him a follow at Eric Mac Lain on Twitter. But Matt, the floor is yours. I'm going to let you introduce our special guest.
Yeah, I wanted to do this because he probably will not remember this, but in February of 2010, I did an interview with Eric, which shows how old I've gotten over the years. Back then, Eric was a 6'5", 265-pound tight end at Jack Britt High School in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and kind of in between his commitments to Tennessee and Clemson. And you were talking how much you liked Jim Bridge at NC State, and we're giving a look at the Wolfpack. So here I am, 10 years later, interviewing a little bit larger than I assume, 265 pounds, Eric Mac Lain, and no longer a tight end. Made the move to offensive line in college, right?
That's right. That's right. Yeah. A little bit heavier since the last time that we spoke.
But obviously gone on to do big things. I'm a big fan of yours. So I was really excited to get you in on this podcast. And before we kind of get into NC State this year and moving forward, I do want to give you an opportunity because I know every week after an NC State win, your Twitter feed probably got hammered with a graphic, right, about the Krispy Kreme challenge and a certain I don't know what y'all call it on the I'm not in the TV terminology. So if you want to set the record straight on what that was about and the fact that I do believe y'all actually did predict NC State would have more wins.
Yeah, it was funny, man, to go back and look at that. And, at the time, didn't, I guess, think that it was going to be a huge deal, but it was a funnier show. So it's fun to, kind of like you said, set the record straight. So we were doing kind of like a prop bet show where we were doing all kinds of different things where how many, points will this team average, and NC State, who had one ACC win a year ago, the proposed question was, will there be more ACC Network, the huddle analysts that could complete the Krispy Kreme challenge? So that would have been 4, or will NC State have more wins? And so I get it. People got upset about that's the standard, or that was the kind of platform that was set there for NC State. But the kicker is we all said that they were going to be better. We all said that NC State was going to be much better and have more than 4 wins. So it was funny to me. Obviously, it got a little out of hand with Jordan Cornette at times, where some NC State folks were coming after him a little bit hard. But, hey, you guys love your football. I can't be mad at you, and I understand. But just so you guys know, we all thought that NC State would have more than 4 wins, and you proved us right. So I appreciate that.
So I had 2 small follow-up questions. Had you ever been kind of the guy? I mean, I think some of the NC State players were getting in on it, right? Kind of the chip on the shoulder. Had you ever had like been the guy providing that chip on the shoulder? And B, could you do the Krispy Kreme?
Yeah. So that was my first time kind of being bulletin board material, which was cool. I mean, I think that if that's what it takes to win some football games, if we can be kind of attributed to some of these 8 wins, I'm all for it. And, welcome it with open arms. And then B, there is no shot that I could complete that. It's so funny. All these fans reaching out. Look, guys, I'm not going to go run, however many miles and throw up a bunch of donuts. I'm sorry. I'm fat. I'm out of shape. I cannot run. That does not sound fun, but it's a great cause. And I'm looking forward to, supporting it via social media and however else we can. So there's no doubt that we'll be involved.
It's 5 miles and 12 donuts. You sure you can take that on, Eric?
I can't run 1 mile. I can eat the donuts, no problem. But the mileage, I mean, come on, guys, look at me.
I think the proper technique is to squish the donuts down.
That's right.
Like 4 of them, squish it down. And then
throw them in there.
Yeah. Justin, go ahead.
It's really one or the other. I mean, I could do the donuts, I could maybe do the running, but together it just makes it such a hard feat. But I guess, now that we're off on that note, I'm curious to know kind of what your takeaway is from NC State football in 2020. I mean, obviously the final record is better than almost everyone in the country would have predicted, right? And particularly considering the circumstances with Devin Leary only getting to start 3 games, Bailey Hockman takes you the rest of the way. And, the Pack goes on a 4-game winning streak to end the regular season, maybe a bit of a sour taste in your mouth after the Gator Bowl loss to Kentucky. Granted, that came with 4 defensive starters, probably the most 4 important players on that side of the ball for NC State out of that game. Yeah. But I mean, do you kind of agree that this is, really a year to build off of for the NC State program as a whole?
100%. And I love what you brought up there. The fact that, nobody maybe outside of the folks at NC State or folks like you guys who are there every single day covering these guys and very, intimate with the program. It was shocking to see. And I think the way that NC State won was amazing. I went on our podcast. I went on, the show on the Huddle. And it's like every week, NC State was winning differently, whether it was offense one week and Leary putting up over, 330 passing yards. It was a rushing attack another week where Knight and Parsons are having, 60, 70 yards each. And then another week, the defense steps up huge against Liberty, holds them to 14 points, and then special teams another. So it was just every single week looked different. And it's just, I think it goes to the coaching staff. I think it goes to these players, the grit that they have, the determination, the will to just find a way to win. And we hear people say that all the time, but this team truly demonstrated that and showed that, hey, look, in this climate of COVID where we have no clue who's going to be available, what the game is going to look like, are we even going to play? They stepped up to the challenge. They stepped up huge, found a way to win different ways each and every time. And honestly, I think this was Coach Doran's best coaching year, not his most talented team by far, no expectations. And I think for him in this climate to be able to pull everyone together and again, show what they're able to, 8 wins, finishing the regular season, like you said, on a 4-game win streak. It was very impressive. And I think folks should be excited. You're an NC State fan. You should be very excited. All the guys coming back. I mean, skill players on offense. You saw some rhythm, some chemistry developing. Now, obviously, hopefully, we have a full spring, a full winter program, and that's even taken to another level with Leary. But I think there's a ton to be excited about. And then defensively, I mean, to be getting back Wilson, Moore, Thomas, all those key guys in the center, which you, again, were missing against Kentucky. And I think that showed off big time. There's a lot of excitement around NC State Wolfpack. And I think when you look at this team, when you look at who's coming back, when you look at the new additions coming in, I think you should be very excited about 2021.
Matt may have some more questions on 2020 specifically, but while we're already kind of reflecting on the season that was with, all the context with coronavirus and the uncertainty and the 10 conference games and everything, I'm curious to get your impression of whether or not this season all in all was a success for the ACC. I mean, obviously the bowl game record wasn't ideal, 0-6, right? And I know, kind of the national narrative of how the conference is, viewed is kind of starts at the top with Clemson, how they do in the college football playoff. And it just so happens they lost the college football playoff game. But considering that ACC probably got in more games than anybody else in the country, with all of the circumstances surrounding, do you find 2020 to be a success? And where do you think the ACC kind of stood in the national perspective of things?
Yeah, 100%. I think this season was a huge success for reasons that you just said, with having the fact that, the ACC did play the most games out of anybody. Now, sure, there was also some cancellations, but that's why they did what they did with timing, getting started, having the built-in weeks where that could happen. And when the ACC could move some games around if need be, canceling a couple there at the end. So I think the ACC was the leader. I think that they said, hey, this is our protocol. We have it in place. Were there hiccups along the way? Sure. Were they figuring it out as we all were as we were going? Yes. And I think that when you talk about safety, when you talk about guidelines, when you talk about doing things that you need to do in the middle of a worldwide pandemic, it's amazing that we even were able to complete the season and get to the finish line. So I do think that the ACC, Commissioner John Swofford, the players involved, the coaching staff, medical staffs, everybody involved did such a great job of just following the rules and doing what's necessary, making unbelievable sacrifices. I just hosted, Clemson's football banquet last weekend, and, just talking to those guys and saying, I can't imagine being a player right now in this climate and literally going from my dorm room to class, if you go to class, or just to the football facility and back home. And that's it. And to be able to do that, for 17, 18 weeks, be fully committed, get through an entire season, it's tremendous. And so I think the ACC did it right. I think the ACC and SEC and even Big 12, had a plan in place. They went by it. It worked out. We got through the season, and it was amazing to see. So I truly think that, they did it right and were able to move on accordingly.
I just want the record to show before the podcast, Justin Williams was the one that said we were not going to talk about COVID. And then he's the one that asked the COVID question.
It's unavoidable. You can't,
right.
Everywhere
That's
you go, you can't run from it.
I'll also add the 0-6 bowl record. Justin and I have talked about this. Come on. Like UNC was without how many of their best players? NC State was without 4 defensive starters. Miami lost its quarterback in the first half. Wake Forest was right there with Wisconsin until Wisconsin apparently figured out that one play and then accepted it 3 straight times. But going back to NC State, was there a game where you thought, okay, this team is better? Was there a moment in the season where you were thinking, where it kind of flipped for you? Right? You know what, this team might be pretty good.
Yeah, and I'm glad you just brought up the bowl game. Sorry, I forgot that mid-sentence thinking of all the COVID. I think that is important to look at and understand who was playing, who wasn't playing. And that's the case with everybody, every conference, every team. That's what all we're going to hear moving forward is were they motivated? Did they want to be there? And so I do truly think that postseason, unless you're in the playoff, unless you're, going for a national championship, it's so hard to hang your hat on a full conference and say, yeah, look what we did. Because again, when you look at these matchups at the end of the day, does it truly matter? So I think moving forward, just to quickly touch on this, the ACC is in a great spot. You look at all the, just star power coming back, especially at the quarterback position, top to bottom. I think Duke is the only team not returning anybody with starting experience. It's going to be a really impressive year in 2021. So I hope that, we get back to some type of normalcy and have, normal training, normal spring, summer, winter, and cannot wait to see what 2021 holds. Looking at NC State and really when, I'm looking at this season and I told you guys that every game was just so different. I think the Pittsburgh win was huge. Looking at that defense that they have, it's scary. The star power that they had all throughout their defensive line, 2 bookends that were, consensus All-Americans in Patrick Jones and Rashad Weaver, just special guys. And to get that victory, a 1-point victory, what was impressive. And then I think, ultimately against Florida State, I think that was a big statement win as well. Now, Florida State obviously had a terrible year and just, I don't know, turmoil to say the least in that program. But to be able to win it is important, and to be able to step up and figure it out when your team is dealing with injuries, when your team is dealing with having guys banged up, it was impressive to see. So I guess early on, in October, that Pitt game is when we all kind of were like, okay, if they can keep putting it together and figuring it out, there might be a chance for a really nice run here.
What I'm always curious. You just mentioned those Pittsburgh defensive ends like you knew them like the back of your hand. That's very impressive. How do you keep up with 15 teams like that? But and then my real question was about Devin Leary. That Pittsburgh game was obviously, he drives the length of the field, wins the game at the end. Did you get a large enough sample size of Devin Leary before he got hurt to give you confidence that he can be the guy going forward now that Bailey Hockman is transferred out?
Yeah. Just to answer your first one quickly, it's difficult. And when you think of all these different guys, and especially this season with COVID, never knowing who's going to be available, it just comes with study, with preparation. And of course, two guys like that really, made a name for themselves. It makes it a little easier to remember them. But to answer your question about Leary, I think the consistency is going to be the big thing. I'm looking at his numbers right here, 165, 336 in that Pittsburgh game, 184, 205. I think that if he has time, and of course, Emeka Emezi coming back is massive. I think that is going to be a really big thing for him. Having a security blanket in my guy, in the slot receiver with Thayer Thomas, I think is going to be a key thing. And then if, Devin Carter can continue to build, I think he has those key pieces there that will really help him. Now, the question is going to be this offseason. What does it look like? So in regards to sample size, maybe a little bit too inconsistent for me to sit here and say, yeah, he's going to be a top 5 ACC quarterback, but I certainly think he has the weapons. He has the offensive line to really make a push for it, to maybe one of those names to where it's all said and done. You're like, man, this guy came out of nowhere and he's, one of the best in the league.
Just to build, go ahead, Matt.
I was just going to say, you're an offensive lineman. Did Ike Ekwonu kind of remind you a little bit of an Eric Mac Lain?
No, man, he's way better than me. He's way more aggressive. Ike is a fantastic player. I wish I had his mindset, man. He loves it. He throws the guy on the ground. He goes and lands on him. He's one of the better prospects, I think. Whenever he decides to leave, he's going to be right up there. Whether he plays tackle, I think he might fit better at a left guard in the NFL, but he's a fun player to watch, and he's so smart. A guy that just loves to play football and loves to, honestly hurt people on the football field. And it's just, you want to see that from your offensive lineman. And he's a great leader. And I'm excited to see him take some more steps and refining his game one more year.
Yeah, he's kind of a walking highlight reel for an offensive lineman.
He is.
I mean, you don't expect so many highlights to come from that position, but I mean, I think he probably won the most pancake syrup trophies for the pancake quads.
And so I did this highlight tape of him, which actually was his a teammate transferring in, Corey Durden, in that Florida State game where he punched him and just knocked him straight on his back, and then he goes and buries him. So, big Icky fan right here for sure.
Well, I want to stay on the offensive side of the ball. You previously mentioned when we were talking about the season as a whole that, NC State seemed to find different ways to win. Towards the end of the season, it seemed like the defense was the side of the ball that really was kind of coming into its own and was kind of carrying the weight in some of those games. But you can't ignore how impressive the offense looked at the beginning of the season and how just night and day of a difference it was able to move the ball down the field compared to the 2019 season. I'm curious to get your perspective on how challenging of a job was it for new offensive coordinator Tim Beck to come in, and this year specifically, coming in, limited to no spring practice to get his guys familiar with the new offensive system, had to be remote for a lot of the summer. And then add in the fact that Devin Leary only starts 3 games. You go into the season opener, not even with the guy you think is going to be your QB1. I mean, what do you make of just how Tim Beck was able to implement his offensive system in year one and yield the results that he did.
Very impressive, to say the least. I think Coach Beck is a great offensive mind. Was very excited when I saw that he was going to be the new offensive coordinator for NC State. I mean, they're running an up-tempo spread, and you just saw the ball flying around, moving to different guys, not being stagnant at all, not just running power, a lot of different looks, some candy at times, if you will, showing you one thing, doing something else. And I certainly think that it was just impressive to see him be able to install his offense the way that he was able to get the results, to yield the statistics and 300-yard passer multitude of times throughout this season. So I think that is something that I'm very excited to see going into this next year. Again, just having more time, together. If we're not able to meet the way we do, still having that comfort and understanding and even proof saying, hey, look, guys, this works. We have a little bit of a blueprint here. Let's figure it out and keep getting even better. I think when you have a guy like Ricky Person Jr., when you have a guy like Zonovan Knight, Bam Knight, it obviously alleviates a lot of stress, because obviously a great run game really can help open those different things up. But like I said, those guys, Carter, Thomas, and Emeka Emezi, it's exciting to see all this coming back. And it's not just, okay, we had 1 year with all these guys, now let's start over and figure it all out. The biggest question mark that honestly I have is with Angeline Levin. I think that he has obviously been a huge piece for the last 3-4 seasons as a tight end, just a guy that's really reliable, seemingly always open. I mean, 6'7", big tight end. I'm sure there's guys in the well that'll step up and be ready, but that's certainly going to be a position that, now that security blanket is gone, are guys like Thayer, Emeka, who's going to step up to be kind of that go-to third down, we need a big play. Not saying that it was always Carey, but he certainly made some huge plays throughout his time here.
You brought up the running backs, Eric, and I wanted to ask you kind of from your perspective in your history as an offensive lineman, when you look at this NC State team in 2020, after that first game against Wake Forest where they were able to run the ball, I think for over 270 yards, you thought this is going to be a run-first offense. They're just going to run down your throat all season. Then you kind of saw as the year went along that NC State kind of found more success in the passing game. I mean, obviously you have a lot of talent in that running back room with Ricky Person Jr., with Zonovan Knight, with Jordan Houston as kind of a change of speed back, scat back, if you will. And then you look at the offensive line and you kind of saw that their strength was in the running game as opposed to pass protection. But when you look at the end of the season, you look at the numbers of NC State, NC State's running game really was, I'd say, about average, if not maybe below average for the league standards. What do you make of all of the talent that was in the running game, but maybe just not yielding the results that maybe we could have expected, maybe we could expect in 2021? Where do you think maybe it fell off a little bit, Eric?
Yeah, it's hard to find and keep that balance. I mean, you even look at like my alma mater, you look at Clemson, the run game certainly teetered off towards the end of the season. And I think it's obviously something that it's hard to do time and time again. You look at who they finished with in Liberty, Syracuse, Georgia Tech. Liberty kind of runs a change of pace defense and doing a bunch of different things. Syracuse, that they run that, 3-5-3, 3-3-5, where they've just got guys flying all around. So it's almost more difficult to run on that because of targeting, because of where you want to go when you're trying to pick who you're double teaming up to. So it sounds like it's, harder to throw the ball on when you have 5 defensive backs, but it actually opens things up a little bit more where you can, get people moving around. And then Georgia Tech, similar thing with just the pass being open. So I certainly don't think it's something that, Coach Beck was like, hey, look, we're getting rid of the run. We're out of here. We've got these 2 great running backs and a third, like you said, in Jordan Houston, who comes in and can roll. I think it's just what people give you, what they see you're doing. Because I certainly agree with you. I think Big Icky again, Joey, I think those guys are great run blockers and can really move the pile, but it's kind of how it goes sometimes.
Yeah, I see about a quick question on defense, since you know all the headliners in the ACC better than we do, looking simply at NC State. Where did Payton Wilson coming back? He decided not to go to the NFL draft. I think he led the ACC in tackles.
He did.
Where did he kind of stack in that early list of, if you were looking at guys who could be ACC Defensive Players of the Year next year? Does Payton Wilson belong on that list? And if so, where would you who else would kind of be on that list?
Yeah, I think there's no doubt that he belongs on that list. I think that he is such a dominant player, a big guy, a rangy guy, 6'3", 6'4", and can just move. Can literally go sideline to sideline. See him having, again, leading the ACC in tackles. Sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes it's a bad thing, for various reasons. But he's a ball player. And I remember way back 2 years ago when we first started doing this, Coach Doran was talking with Coach Mark Richt and saying, hey, this is going to be a ball player. Not a lot of people know this guy's name. He got hurt last year with his knee, but Peyton Wilson is going to be somebody that y'all need to pay attention to. And we've loved him. He plays through the whistle, sometimes after the whistle. He's a guy that you love to have on your team, hate to go against him. So I think there's no question that he should be in the running for that. When you look again around the league and you say who else is going to step up to kind of be in that spot of defensive player, I think Clemson is going to have a handful of guys. We saw those young freshmen just play out of their minds this year, and Brian Brussey, Miles Murphy specifically. I think that North Carolina is again going to have a guy out on the edge that's going to step up big, whether it's a young freshman that they just signed or even, a couple of their cornerbacks that are really going to be dominant. And then I'm sure there's going to be, some surprise guys that continue to step up. Pitt's going to have a couple, I'm sure, that schematically they're always, just reloading on the defensive line and linebacker. And then, of course, Miami as well. So it'll be interesting to see who is going to step up and who's really, going to make the name for themselves and take that award.
Yeah, you mentioned him before, but Corey Durden coming to NC State. This is a guy I think some people thought would be off to the NFL after this season. Obviously didn't have the year. A lot of Florida State players probably didn't have the year that they were kind of expecting to have. But
for sure,
in a way, it almost seems like he basically takes Aleem McNeil's spot and kind of keeps the defense humming in an ideal world. What can Corey Durden give NC State on the defensive line?
Yeah, well, that's some big shoes to fill, literally and figuratively, with big McNeil up there. So I think it's going to be interesting. I think he's a little bit different. Obviously, a huge prospect, 6'5", 315 pounds, has kind of been defensive end, has been at nose guard. So it'll be interesting to see where does NC State kind of land on his position. Whether it is right up front in a zero technique or do they move him around at a tackle position. I think that obviously he has great size. That length is going to play a huge part of it. And then it's just a motivation factor. Are we going to see a guy that understands that this is his last shot before wanting to go to the NFL? Does that take him to another level? We saw flashes, great flashes at Florida State, where rushing the passer, being great in the run, even dropping in some coverage here and there. So does he, take advantage of this and understand that, this is my true last shot? Do I want it? And what does that look like? Because again, I mentioned all those great linebackers and Payton Wilson, Isaiah Moore, Drake Thomas. That's going to be key of him just gobbling up double teams and letting those guys feast. NFL scouts look at that and they pay attention, but also in blitz pickup, they're going to be looking at those linebackers. So that might free up Corey in pass, rushing situations to where he can go out and eat. So I think it'll totally be up to him. Obviously, Coach Doran knows what he wants and knows what those expectations they have on the defensive side of the ball. So it's going to be interesting to see, can Corey take another step and maybe get to where everybody thought he would be.
You've already mentioned how, because of the extra year of eligibility that was granted this fall, a lot of seniors coming back, there's going to be a lot of teams in the ACC with a lot of returning talent. It's going to make for a very competitive league next year. Obviously about 10 of the 11 starters on the defensive side of the ball for the Wolfpack are planning to return. Similar numbers on the offensive end, although there's probably going to be some questions as to the offensive line depth or who's going to fill in for guys like Joe Sculthorpe up front. But when you look at NC State specifically with the returning talent, Clearly there's some excitement on the offensive end if you can get a healthy Devin Leary back. But is there one side of the ball, Eric, that maybe you're a little bit more excited about for the Wolfpack, whether it be offensive or defensive?
I really have a lot of, just expectations from this defense. And so I'll go defense here, and I think when you look at them and when you look at the fact that you have these great linebackers and a secondary that, 2 years ago was really stressed and put into some key situations very early. Now, it wasn't great experience because it was a bunch of guys getting beat and getting beat on the scoreboard. But when you see them and what they're able to do, and when you see the body types and you look at this roster and you look at the size, the speed that's there, it didn't necessarily translate to the stat sheet. I'm looking at averaging 31 points a game, giving up 31 points a game, giving up over 400 yards a game defensively. I think they have enough guys talent-wise and now enough guys experience-wise where NC State should really take a big step forward defensively. So that's why I'm excited to see them. I'm excited that a ton of these guys are coming back. I think that, again, one of the best linebacking cores in the country, and really can step up big and solidify that. And so that's why I'm really rocking with this defense. And I think you should be really excited to see them all back.
I'm going to kind of wrap up my questions with something not really about this NC State team, but you do a podcast with Kelly Gramlich, who's I love following her on Twitter. If you're into women's basketball, and NC State, while we recorded this podcast, moved up to number 2.
Come on.
In the AP poll, right? And Louisville's number 1. So 1-2 ACC. Hopefully NC State women's basketball will get to play basketball again sometime soon.
Wouldn't that be nice?
But y'all do a podcast together, and I know y'all had Marquise Williams on your podcast, and y'all started talking about places to play in the ACC, and I was interested to hear both of y'all talk about Carter Finley Stadium. So if you could kind of rehash that for those who may have not have heard it. I know we retweeted it, but what's it like to play in Carter Finley Stadium? And kind of what Marquise was saying, what was it like to play at Carter Finley Stadium in Raleigh?
Yeah, it sucks because you guys are passionate, you're loud, you're crazy. It's funny when I'm asked that question and I say I list NC State as one of the most difficult places to play that I had to go and play. And people who are maybe outside of the ACC or maybe newer, we'll say that, to the ACC kind of question me and say, what are you talking about? And I'm telling you, Carter Finley packs it out. You guys, again, the passion, the excitement, the anger even, when anybody comes in there and has any kind of success, it's a loud place. And the way the stadium's designed, they're right on top of you. You've got that big wall, but they're right there. And so it's very difficult. And I certainly have it on my top 3 toughest places to play.
I think Marquise was the one that said something about they also might be a little mean. Is that basically what he was saying?
Well, that's probably him being a UNC quarterback. I'm sure you guys were very mean to him.
This is kind of a big picture question. I mean, you were a big deal coming out of high school. Obviously, you had Tennessee, Clemson. You could have gone where you wanted. What's it going to take for an NC State and even a UNC? Because this is one of those states where a lot of the big in-state guys, in Georgia, they tend to be more Georgia, or Florida, they tend to stick around the Florida schools. What's it going to take for the in-state schools to be able to, or can they realistically put that, fence around the state of North Carolina?
Yeah, I think Mac Brown is starting to do that, which nobody listening to this podcast wants to hear me say that, but that was a huge thing for him coming back. And he knew that if you wanted to be successful, you have to go and get the best players in the state. And I think NC State has done a good job of that, but it's almost like the at least when I was growing up, that's the stigma that, we're all still battling of the fact that the ACC is a basketball conference, and the fact that these guys are leaving North Carolina to go to the Clemsons, the Georgias, the Floridas, Alabama, simply on just history that may or may not be accurate anymore. And I think that's the case. I think everybody just continuing to develop, the ACC continuing to develop. And of course, these North Carolina schools, as we've seen, just continue to keep playing. And I think that will come with time, and obviously comes with emphasis. I think it has to be important to your staff to say, hey, look, we're not letting these guys leave. We're going to have them stay home. And I think that's actually even a trend that we're seeing a little bit when you look at the Marylands, when you look at North Carolina, you guys, when we look at even up in like Syracuse, we're seeing guys want to stay home and want to represent their state. So I think that's something that if there's any time to emphasize that enough, it's during a pandemic and going out and just saying, hey, let's be close to mom. Let's stay home. So it's going to be interesting to see, can, a school like NC State continue to capitalize and just have that as a big point of emphasis for their recruiting teams.
And again, we thank Eric Mac Lain of the ACC Network for joining us on this podcast. If you want to listen to more of his work, please subscribe to his podcast, Gramlich and Mac Lain. If you like all the ACC sports, give it a follow, give it a subscribe, just like our podcast. Subscribe to us wherever you listen to podcasts. But Eric, I want to wrap up this podcast staying on kind of a big picture topic going into 2021. Obviously, we've talked about, because of the returning talent, it's going to be another competitive year, maybe even more so than 2020. And you look around the league, we're looking at going back to the division standpoint, more of a normal type of schedule going into 2021. Clemson kind of being, the assumed favorite in the Atlantic. North Carolina looking like they're going to be probably a favorite in the Coastal. When you look at the whole body of 14, or, if you want to throw Notre Dame in the mix, 15 teams, where do you see NC State in the picture going into 2021? Do you see it as a potential top 25 team? Do you see it as a potential, dark horse candidate that maybe could sneak up on a Clemson in the Atlantic Division?
I think it's going to be interesting to see where do we rank them preseason? Where does NC State start? Is there going to be that respect factor of, hey, the way they finished the season, I get the bowl game loss, but half the team wasn't available. Are we still going to respect what they were able to do? And I think they can crack that top 25. I think there's no doubt that you look at the building blocks, you look at the potential for guys to get better in this year, seniors who decided, hey, we're coming back, transfers that say, hey, we want to play. You've got an All-American, thank you for sending me that, an offensive lineman transferring in that's going to step up and play right away. So I think when you look at the ceiling, what does it look like? Well, I think, middle of the pack should be guaranteed. I think there's no reason for this team to take any type of steps backwards. And so when you look at building upon that, is it capable to sneak up on a Clemson? They're having a quarterback change. They're having a running back change, losing some key pieces, but also getting a ton back on defense. When you look at North Carolina, losing a ton on the offensive side of the ball, is there going to be that same continuity? So I think in a season, in a year coming off of what we just saw and how crazy it was to have 10, 11 guys, starters coming back, that's going to be so important, and really excited to see where can NC State, kind of finish. I think if they're anywhere between, kind of that 7 to 3 mark, that's a huge win, cannot go backwards at all. And I don't think they will.
And one last big picture question for you, Eric, before we sign off here. 2020, the scheduling with the 10 conference games, and you kind of threw out the divisions. Everybody kind of played each other. NC State almost got a Coastal Division round robin like they've been wishing for many, many years. And, at least here locally, NC State fans were really excited to have the opportunity to see Duke as an opponent. I don't think they played Duke for 7 years before this season. I know Duke was on the original schedule, but it was kind of fun to see that local matchup there that you wouldn't really normally get to see on a consistent basis in a normal year. Just looking at 2020 and moving forward ahead, what do you make of the successes that you were able to tell from, the scheduling and some of these different teams getting to play each other that maybe normally don't get to play each other because of the divisions? What can the ACC learn from this year and make of it going forward?
Yeah, everything that I've heard from a multitude of fan bases, probably actually every fan base throughout the ACC, even including, Notre Dame in that, is that they loved what they saw this year. They loved not having divisions. They loved having the fact that we had the two best teams playing in the ACC championship. We didn't have an undefeated team and a 6-6 team, representing the conference just because their 6 wins all happen to be in the ACC. So I hope the conference takes advantage of that. I hope the conference sees that and says, hey, look, this is the best thing moving forward. If we want to continue, to put people in this college football playoff and maybe even have 2 teams in, this is what we need to do. And I think playing people more often, that's a lot more fun. I would love to see the ACC maybe move to 9 conference games and get rid of some of these FCS games, that these money games that, that there's just, honestly, there's no reason to play them. So I would love to see us continue along this line. I think, again, it's having the best product you can in the ACC championship just means more. I mean, this was the most anticipated conference championship ever, going into this season. You have, the number 2 team in the country versus the number 3 team in the country. I mean, that is something that I truly believe the ACC could have on a consensus basis, is, maybe not a top 3 matchup, but certainly a top 10 each and every year. And so I hope that that's where we get to. I don't know if it's going to be able to happen as quickly as next year, but I think that this year overall, you've got to give it an A+, and people were excited about it.
Well, again, a big thank you to Eric Mac Lain of the ACC Network for joining us today on the Wolfpacker Podcast. Please go give him a follow on Twitter. You can follow him at Eric Mac Lain, and you also should definitely subscribe to his podcast, Gramlich and McLean. You can subscribe to that podcast wherever you listen to us, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play. And of course, you can always stream our podcast on thewolfpacker.com. While you're on thewolfpacker.com, please be sure to use promo code PACK60. That's promo code PACK60 for a free 60-day trial on all of our premium content, news, and analysis. You can follow us on Twitter at The Wolfpacker. You can follow me personally at Justin H. Will. Give us a like on Facebook, NC State Wolfpack on thewolfpacker.com. And for Eric Mac Lain, Matt Carter, this is Justin Williams, and this has been the Wolfpacker Podcast.